I'm glad people are tuned in if they're listening to this right now. I promise it does not sound sexy on paper, but we are going to make this conversation as interesting as possible. We're here with my good friend, Eric Pohlman. Normally we don't... Oh, yeah, we also got Rainwater here, in case anybody was wondering. Not that he's ever been absent, but
just
still.
a standard co-host of the show.
Yeah. So we don't normally do big, long intros and this and that, but Mr. Pohlman here was my roommate for at least 50% of my career at Savannah College of Art and Design, right? 2 out of the 4 years we were roommates. Mm-hmm. And he was studying, and he received a master's in architecture while he was there. To me, all that meant was he would be draped over his giant drawing desk in our dorm room, or yelling at me looking for his T-square more often than not. But then you went on after SCAD, and you also went and you got a master's degree from the University of
South Florida,
and that degree was in
Urban and Community Design.
Okay, so buildings, basically.
Yes.
All right. So, let's make this sexy. Your art form is probably the only art form that can legitimately say there's a degree of danger involved if you fuck up what you're doing, because you need to be considering physics and weather and people being idiots and all kinds of things. So I'm very curious to know right off of the bat, just picking your brain about it. For you, what comes first? If you were to be designing something with architecture or whatever it is, what comes first? The safety or the art aesthetic or what? Where do you start as an architect?
So, the answer to where do you start kind of depends on what branch of architecture you're coming from. Sure. So, very similar to film and television and other medias, there's different branches. There's just the big architecture. But then underneath that, there's different angles that you're coming from. So
like genres.
Someone who is... Exactly. So someone who's doing, say, a building that is intended for industrial use is going to come at it from health and safety and cost efficiency above everything else.
I didn't even consider cost efficiency being a part of it, but that's,
So that's one angle. And then you have commercial architects that are efficiency and cost value is pinnacle, and then life safety, and then everything else afterward. And then you can get into things like residential architecture, and that really starts to be where you can flex a lot more in terms of coming at it first from the art side, and then incorporating the other standards on top. So that's kind of the interesting portion of architecture with that.
All right, so where would your interests fall mostly? Because like back when we were living together, all that you used to preach about were arches. Every time we went somewhere, you saw an arch or something. You were like, "Joe, there's an arch over there. I want to go look at it." And I'm just like, "It's a fucking arch. Like, it's a McDonald's. Why are we walking over here?" Like, so I'm curious to know what about architecture is what grabbed you? What drew you into it?
So at the onset, it was exactly what you just said. It was arches. It was the built form. It was how things really looked and how they functioned in relation to that. Is what drew me in for architecture to begin with. And then over time, especially after I left SCAD, I realized that probably 98% of what you do as an architect has absolutely nothing to do with what you learn in school.
Oh, so basically like most of our majors.
Exactly. 98% of what you're doing in an architecture firm is going to be project management, so coordinating with different contractors, coordinating with different subgroups, and then on top of that doing detailed drawings. So, we look at a wall and there's a window in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, someone has to draw how that window is actually installed. Someone has to draw up what does this wall look like if you were to cut it in half. So from the exterior to the interior, what's all the different layers on it?
Okay.
And to be honest, that lost me.
Okay, so that's
where
I would
that was kind of where the start of me during my internship when I had that experience. It just kind of really went, oh wow, this is not what I thought it was.
It's just kind of mundane artwork or like grunt work kind of deal.
Correct.
Basically,
just out of curiosity, I was going to ask. So in that time, so is there sort of like a hierarchy in terms of who determines, like from general to specific, who determines like the actual shape of the building, and then as you go down, you get into further and further like specifics of people who design interiors, people who design all the specific like little ins and outs of the building, basically. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought
at
about
a large architecture firm that say a New York firm, there would be principals who all they do is the big project ideas. They draw up the big ideas that you see on the cover of magazines, or you see on the when the news flashes up that some new development is coming in. But then that one person has like 15 people under them actually working to get it done.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had no idea it was that big of a team. I would have assumed there might have been like some people working behind the scenes, but no, I had no idea how big those teams were. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very rare to find a small commercial firm.
Sure.
Generally, you have lots of people working on projects because the head of the firm is going to be out there bringing in new contracts, bringing in new projects, and then also going to all the other meetings to make sure the projects are meeting all the.
Okay. So like the head of the firm is almost like a producer, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting.
Now, when you design a building, though, do you or would you try to sway someone like an interior designer to your will? Like, is that part of the interest to it? Because like as a writer, when I'm writing a script, like I don't want to let an actor know, oh, this is the way I want you to play this, because then they're not going to play it that way. But I have to like subtly try to guide them towards it without, bashing them over the head with it. So I'm curious to know if, as an architect, does your mind, or as, when you would be designing something, would you be interested in the interior design, or is it strictly the structural thing that appealed to you?
So me personally, it was more about what was happening outside the building was interesting to me, which is where I went on to go for a urban and community design degree, because what that dealt with was how do a group of buildings influence the space outside of them. That to me was what I really found interesting when I went through architecture. And so in terms of what you just asked with, trying to sway someone to do something, I would say that's more of what I do currently as a urban planner.
Well, see, now, when you told me you were going into, like, urban planning and stuff, I thought, oh, okay, he's just going to tell them where the sidewalk goes, or, which bushes have to come down or whatever. Like, I wasn't entirely sure what...
That's a big part of it, too.
Well, but I wasn't entirely sure what, like, the artistic design part of it was, and I was curious if you could, like, enlighten us a little bit about that portion of urban design.
Sure. So, urban design and urban planning really, they deal a lot with the invisible zoning ordinances that guide everything that we see around us. And then on top of that, every city has master plans or ideas for certain districts, but sometimes their codes don't line up with what those are.
Explain a little bit more to what that means, the codes. What do you mean?
So every design, every project out there has to go through some type of zoning or regulatory review. And what that says is exactly what you were just talking about. You need to have a sidewalk, and your building has to be 15 feet from the street edge. You have to have a row of bushes. It can only be 45 feet tall, stuff like that.
Wow.
Like there's whole written codes, and once you start going down like that little pathway, it gets really squirrely and weird. Um, because once you start reading into that stuff, it'll like call your attention to another chapter, to another chapter. So like it rabbit hole is what we usually call it, going down the rabbit hole. But a lot of times the master plans show things that, although they are beautiful, they would work well. It would make a place walkable. It would make a place very interesting regarding, having outdoor patios, having buildings that front the street and activate a sidewalk. The zoning code will let someone come in and put a standard McDonald's with a full drive-through around it. So what we have to do as urban planners is try and talk people into going that extra mile, getting extra value out of their project by activating it along the street and things of that nature.
Interesting. That's actually interesting to me. Like I'm very curious about stuff like that.
In a lot of ways, it sounds almost like SimCity in real life, where it's just like you having to plan out, blocks and blocks of city streets. That's interesting. Like that.
Yeah. So, but imagine SimCity is, that's what everyone goes to for urban planning. But imagine you say that this area should be a commercial block.
Yeah.
Well, and then someone else who you don't even know gets to come in and actually show what it's going to look like. That's urban planning.
I gotcha. Yeah.
Now, is that frustrating though, having to work within that box? Because that's got to be annoying as hell when there's like codes that don't make sense. Because Lord knows that there's been things that were passed that were outdated, or the development in the region, or even just because of like weather or however humans interact with it, or whatever. Areas change, and I'm curious to know, like from an artistic standpoint, how do you? Is there ways you can get around that, like creatively, or do you just get smacked down with technicalities and get stuck under the thumb of like outdated laws or codes or whatever it may be?
There are certainly times when outdated codes and laws truncate you. But a lot of times, especially like where I'm at in Charleston, we have a commercial design review board. So they get to be a lot more flexible and loose with how things get built. So they can actually tell someone, okay, you want a McDonald's, that's fine. That's allowed by our zoning code. You can have McDonald's here. But we're going to make you pull it up to the sidewalk. We're going to make you have it be a story and a half tall. And it has to be an all-brick exterior. So, like, design review boards, they start to have that flexibility that you're talking about. So what we would do as urban planners is kind of, when the applicant first comes to us, we kind of put them on notice with that. We're like, this is what usually gets reviewed and approved by the board. And then we'll also talk to, board members or other such people where, staff does get to have input, where we say, like, okay, well, this project, if they do this, this, and this, staff would be happy. Okay. And then the board can say, we'd be happy with that too. You have to do that.
Okay. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, like there's sort of an aesthetic protocol that's determined beforehand. That's really okay, huh?
And that's designed, I assume, to create some kind of harmony within a quote-unquote neighborhood?
Correct.
Okay.
That's interesting. So, like, what if somebody has a house and most of the houses are designed a certain way, and, like, say they've bought a plot that's, like, right next to it or something along that lines, but they don't want to do it the way the other houses are designed and this and that. They get shot down and they can't do it, or can they...
Well, that depends on where you're at. So the city of Charleston downtown has a Board of Architecture review that includes residential architecture. When you leave the downtown peninsula, there's no longer a Board of Architecture review.
So you can just go to town.
Residential. Yeah.
So to speak.
So to speak. I mean, as long as, again, you're within the zoning code boundary boxes. So the zoning code sets up a lot of different boundary boxes for people to work in.
Now, what about things like weather? Does that really, like, how does that affect your job? Like, because obviously, you guys aren't coastal, right?
Oh, yeah, we are.
You're considered coastal. Okay, so I assume things like hurricanes and snowstorms and the like affect some of the decision making that you have to have. What are some of the challenges that that go into that, at least from an artistic standpoint? Like, what are you limited by?
So right now, artistically, what we'd be limited by to combat a few of the things that we're going through is our zoning code itself, having height caps to things, or having density caps for like new multifamily or other attached family home developments. Something that we're going through right now is Charleston is prone to flooding. And in the past, let's see if I can get this statistic right. I think in the past 4 years, we have seen a dramatic increase of what is called sunny day flooding. So that means there's no big rain event. It's just high tide has become higher.
Wow.
Oh.
And so what we're noticing is that trend. So we're trying to figure out how can we prep our area, very much like a lot of coastal Louisiana, prep our area for sea level rise, because it's only going up.
Right.
I wish it would at least plateau, but it's only going up. And we have to figure out how we can continue to grow, because we're a Sunbelt city. We are also having a population increase. So at some point, we're going to have population and water starting to pinch out where we can build.
Have there been any like creative developments, like in terms of how things are designed or planned or whatever, that combats that seawater rise? Like
Not
cool
yet,
gadgets or just cool designs or
we're,
something? You know what I mean? Like something outside the box, like is there an Elon Musk to that kind of design?
Houseboats everywhere.
Exactly. Thank you, Rainwater. Houseboats everywhere. So what Charleston did actually last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, we contracted with a group out of the Netherlands for a series of reviews called Dutch Dialogues. And what that did is exactly what you're talking about. It looked at how do you adapt to this in a creative and design-friendly way, because you cannot engineer your way out of flooding.
Right.
At some point, you can put check valves in along the coast, which is stuff that doesn't let the water come back in the pipe, only out. You can put those in. You can put in pump stations to pump water from the land out into the river. You can put floodgates in. Everything mechanical at some point will fail.
Right. Yeah, as evidence with New Orleans, for sure, has had issues with that for years and years and years and years, and will continue
Correct.
to.
So that's really what the Dutch Dialogues looked at, was how can we grow and adapt Charleston in a creative way that's going to create a new community. So we're still moving through kind of the, forget the pun, the ripples from what they did, and trying to incorporate some of that into it, but we're not there yet.
I'm
yeah,
curious.
no, that's a.
Go ahead, Rainwater.
I was just gonna say that's a unique design challenge that I think the world over people are still trying to figure out how to deal with it, because it's coming, like you were saying earlier.
Well, I was going to ask you about this. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was a joke, but it looked real enough to me like it wasn't photoshopped. But months or maybe a year or two ago, I saw a picture on the internet, and that's, of course, the most trusted place to go for information.
The internet is the most trusted, yeah.
But they were literally, and I don't remember where it was, but they were building houses what looked like on stilts. Like, there was just a structure at the bottom that was just open-ended. It just looked like an empty frame to a house. And then, like, the house itself was, like, 3 or 4 stories up. And then the bottom was just, like a wooden structure supporting it and raised it above. Is that something...
Yeah, that's like
what you described as FEMA floodplain compliant for the velocity zone along the coast. So you see that type of home from Virginia all the way through... Texas.
So it is real.
Mm-hmm.
See, this is what my sheltered little Connecticut life doesn't know about. And so who came up with something like that? Was that like, who
So
sits there and
that was
says...
in response to FEMA.
They just said,
FEMA
put a house
said
on
that
stilts and that's it?
Because FEMA said that the only way that you would get flood insurance would be as if you were above a certain elevation from sea level. So for that location, they could say that you have to be 14 feet above sea level. Your lot is only at 4 feet above sea level. So you had to make up 10-foot difference. And they would also say something like, the bottom of the structure needs to either have breakaway walls or it has to be over 50% open for when a wave comes in during a storm event. It won't hit a wall and then blow it out and create debris that's going to damage other buildings around it.
Wow.
And that's why you see them just up on telephone poles, essentially.
That's crazy. I never in a million years thought that picture was real, but I guess the internet is dependable sometimes.
Sometimes. For instance.
I wanted to talk a little bit about moving away from just like what you do and stuff like that. I'm curious to know because outside of you being a slave to the Montgomery Hall, when we were Eichberg, I'm sorry, Montgomery. I think
Don't you go confusing those buildings. That was animation.
What was it, Monty? Right. Monty was like just where the good food was, right? That was where Bite Cafe was.
That was the animation building.
Yeah, that's right.
They got their own dormitory after many years.
I believe it because people used to actually sleep in Monty. It used to be a dorm with just a couple classrooms involved.
They finally built one out there right next to it on property.
Well, that place was a little bit of a trek. But anyway, the point that I was getting at was, outside of just that, when we lived together, you were a massive Star Wars, and still to this day are a massive Star Wars fan. Lord of the Rings, things of that nature. And I'm wondering, what's your kind of perspective on the architecture of? We'll start with Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Like, what kind of things stand out to you from those fictional stories or whatever in terms of like an architecture, or even I don't know if urban design would qualify, but if it does, feel free to speak on it.
Because there was actually there was a lot of articles published about Wakanda.
Oh.
When Black Panther came out as this Afro-futurism for both how it worked in the architecture of it, as well as the urban planning of it, because everything in there was walkable or mass transit. So there was a lot of talk about, how they designed out that city so it looked lived in, it looked real. I think the movies that you call to mind, which are Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, they do that as well. They make really good job of these completely fictional cities, completely fictional locations that looked lived in and real for the most part. There are a few locations in Star Wars that are just, quite apparent that they kind of cut some corners. But like the new Mandalorian, they made a very good effort to make everything look lived in and rational.
I'm curious, what would be some examples, like in either Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, of like some places that where it's like, how would that, like for you, kind of set off your alarm of like, that wouldn't work, like what the hell?
Probably the one that unfortunately comes to mind would definitely be two locations, and they involve the exact same environment, and that would be Mustafar and Mordor. There's so much open lava.
I think FEMA would have something to say about that.
But other than that, I mean, a lot of it just, it especially like Lord of the Rings, they took a lot of time to make sure everything looked like it was purpose built, like it actually had thought put behind it. So like when you look through Minas Tirith, they made sure that each level kind of looked like it advanced from the next one. Like there were different changes in each level as you went up. The same with Rohan. They researched very well what standard Viking era settlement community would look like, and they replicated it, but this time on a mountainside.
Yeah,
So
no, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. I was gonna also ask, are there any particular buildings over time that have been personally inspiring for you, like when you were studying architecture, or even now that you think about, like, as an urban developer, like you would love to see in the place where you live?
yeah, so something that from history that has always kind of captivated my attention was, and it's such a mundane answer, the Pantheon in Rome.
Sure. Yeah.
It is, just this massive concrete dome that was built over, 2,000 years ago now, I think, at this point. So,
isn't that the one with a whole bunch of arches?
It's certainly one of them.
Does it's got a whole bunch of arches on the outside, isn't that correct?
That's a Colosseum.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking about. Okay, never mind.
You're thinking Colosseum. Pantheon is it's the largest dome that was created until, I think, the Renaissance. There was finally one that surpassed it. But yeah, it was. And then, like, the urban planner side of me, what I find so fascinating is you look at a map now of where the Pantheon is, and it's in the heart of Rome. When it was built, it was outside the gate. So, that for an urban planner side, I'm just fascinated by that, like how this city has grown that much around it.
It's such an organic way of like forming around it. I get what you're saying.
I'm curious to know, on that same kind of note of things that you would like to see, is there anything from fictional media that like particularly jumped out at you that you were like, that's a brilliant idea, why has no one actually done that? Like how they saw something in Back to the Future and they were like, oh shit, we need to make hoverboards, or like I'm curious to know from like a design of buildings or something like that, is there anything that's ever jumped out at you that you were like, why isn't this real?
I mean, the biggest nerdy side of me, I would love to see either the Jedi Temple or the Senate building actually real.
Is that just because you just want to go walk around inside of it, or do you think that there's like an architectural benefit to designing that way?
There's nothing architecturally significant about either of those. They're just very fascinating buildings to me. Especially the Senate one, because it was shaped like a giant mushroom and then had like this massive open air auditorium in the middle of it. I'm just, how you would figure that one out is mind-boggling to me.
I'm assuming that in the Star Wars world they were playing with physics that they could do whatever they want with, like gravity could be whatever they wanted it to be. So like, and then also in terms of the, not so much the structural design, because from a viewer audience standpoint, it needs to make sense in your head that it could work in order to keep you involved in the story. So I'm assuming that they were taking liberties with whatever kind of metal was designing it or whatnot. Yes? You're shaking your head. There's a majority audience that only listens to audio. I just want to emphasize that you're shaking your head.
Yes. The biggest example for that is the idea that Coruscant has a few hundred levels below the surface of built environment.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that's right.
That what we see on the surface in those movies is the top of essentially large single blocks that go deep down to the planet core. Actually, the Clone Wars, we do get to explore some of those locations, which, I geeked out about that there's this whole sub area to Coruscant that we actually did get to see some of it.
I had no idea that even existed, which is proof that I never took your advice and watched the show, even though you've hammered me multiple times to start watching it. I just can't do it. There was something I was going to ask you. Damn it, now I just forgot what it was. Shizzle.
Well, that just got said.
I haven't used the word shizzle in a very long time. So, in terms of architecture and urban design, what is it that you're hoping to contribute to that quote-unquote art medium in your career path? Like, what's your dream contribution at least to do? What's the goal for Eric Pohlman in this realm?
So right now my goal is exactly what my job is. So I'm lucky that they lined up finally. My goal is what's called suburban retrofit.
Now, retrofit implies that you're going backwards. How's that work?
What you're doing is, so in Charleston, there's a very large area called West Ashley, and it was built from the 1930s to present.
Okay.
Most of it, you have to jump in your car, drive to where you're going. Suburban retrofit, what you're trying to do is, all these shopping centers, all these schools are in close proximity to neighborhoods where people live. But you can't get there unless you're in a car. So what a suburban retrofit is trying to do is add vitality and add mobility options in areas that have already been built, and therefore helping conserve land, conserve the environment, because you're no longer participating in suburban sprawl and pushing further out into virgin forests or into former farmland. Instead, what you're doing is taking these large asphalt parking lots and putting in new areas where you might come for multiple activities all in one day, but it's not all in one line. It's now in like more of a village format.
That's very interesting. I would like to do that. I would like to be able to walk to a store. But I almost feel like you have an ulterior motive in this, because if I'm following the through line here, if you're eliminating the need for cars and things like that, and people are walking, then in theory, the global warming crisis or the sea level rising might plateau as you were hoping for before. Or God, God be with us, it may start to recede, and then you don't have to worry about building houses on stilts and stuff. So I really feel like you're just looking out for yourself long term. Is that just you trying to make your job easier?
Isn't that what we're all doing in our careers?
Say again?
Isn't that what we're all doing in our careers, is looking out for ourselves?
Kind of, yeah. I guess that's fair. No, that's awesome though. I wish that there were more stores within walking distance. Personally, I just wish there were stores that had more content choices inside them. I don't know if that's on topic or not, but there's no variety in stores. So I'm curious to know. That's another thing that's an interesting art component that I wanted to ask you about, because you were talking about creating like a harmony within a particular district or neighborhood or whatnot. But where, in terms of urban design or architecture, is there room for chaos or contrast or things to be outside of the norm? Because I think that's one of the reasons why we might have lower viewership on this episode, is because there's a general belief. I don't want to say it's a fact, but it's a general belief that everything within architecture or general urban design or whatever is slightly mundane. Or it's all too harmonious where it just becomes flat and boring. So I'm curious to know, where is there room for the excitement and the interesting things to be inserted or grown upon?
You actually bring up a very good point that design review boards and architectural guidelines get hit on very frequently for, which is a forced harmony or a forced monotony. Especially when you have an architectural review board, what you see happen quite frequently is if they continually approve something that, say, has a gabled roof and it's brick facade and it's a white front door, everyone's going to have that because that's what they know will get through. So you do run that risk of having this kind of fake forced monotony because people don't want to go through trying to do something unique and cutting edge. It is a tricky one to balance, and I wish I had a better answer for you than that. But that it's definitely something that we still strive for. We try to make things unique to themselves. We try to make sure people are doing things that are interesting, and not just because it's the new Chipotle that's interesting, but because it's what is the Chipotle in? What is it providing to the area?
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, because ultimately you want to create a character for your town or your city or the place that you're at, and that certainly seems to be. I've lived in a couple of different places the last, couple of years or so, and like Portland, Oregon was a place I was living for a while, and it was a place that certainly had a lot of character and charm to its exteriors, to its buildings, and they tried to facilitate that a lot in that city. And then coming back to the South, like specifically like in Southwest Louisiana, it's very, I would say, practical, right? Like everything that's being built, it's like we're trying to put this up as quick as we can, make sure it's hurricane resistant, and then that's about it. Like in terms of actual form or like intrigue in form, it's just very kind of minimalist, right? And I feel like that's something that I see. It seems like that sort of style is a little more popular in terms of general trends happening overall.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you would have any insight into that general trend. Is it like a cost efficiency thing, or
Exactly.
is it like okay?
It's a cost efficiency, and then also like a lot of these a lot of the larger name national chains or international chains like Wendy's, McDonald's, Popeyes. What they do is they have internal architecture teams that put together, branded specific buildings, and then they will contract with the local architect to basically make the local architect run through the permitting process.
Yeah, like Taco Bell recently, I guess, must have had some kind of wire go through the whole company. Like, we need to make all Taco Bells look modernized in this new way, or like.
That's
McDonald's
exactly what happened.
Yeah, McDonald's had that too.
Like Wendy's came through, and Wendy's used to have kind of like a mansard roof, like a shingle roof on the outside. Not quite not quite the Pizza Hut extreme roof, but you could tell Wendy's by the exterior.
Yeah.
Well, what they did was they came in and they modernized it. So they pulled all that off. They put up metal panels of flat color, and they made it a box. End of day. You cannot get more efficient when you are a drive-through based company than having a rectangle that the car circles around and gets the hell out.
Right. Burger King's still holding strong with their like 1980s ass looking building.
Yes.
That's true. Burger King really doesn't. I mean, they've changed their logo recently, but I don't think they've changed the design of their building at all.
Not really. And it's kind of sad. All the fast food companies, if you pull their logo off, they basically all look the exact same now for their buildings.
Now
and
they
used to all have very unique building format. You could tell a Taco Bell from a Pizza Hut, from a Wendy's, from McDonald's. They all had their own architectural style, and instead, I think because they kept getting kind of combined into these larger companies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So Rainwater touched upon something that I wanted to see if you could expel upon a little bit, but in terms of the architectural design or just the urban design of an area, I'm curious to know what insight you can give us about what certain types of design elements or just whatever it may be evokes particular emotions. Like, so you had like a fascination with arches. Like what kind of an emotion? No, I'm serious, because when you go somewhere really where there's arches, it's supposed to there is a design element to the architecture or the design or whatever of areas that's supposed to elicit emotional responses from people, whether it's to focus them in on the work that they're doing or relax them in a park or whatever it may be. I'm curious to know, like, what elements create what emotions? Like, what insight can you give us to that?
Sure. Also, I did like more than just arches for anyone still listening.
That's bullshit. That's all we talked about for 4 years.
Just that. I also loved Art Deco, and I loved, actually, I pulled a lot of love in my architecture from film and television, and having a flair for theatric in it. But that kind of goes to what Andrew's talking about here, which is buildings, especially when they're designed well, there is a level of psychology to them. So for one thing, yeah, you want someone to really be inspired when they walk in your front door. You're going to have a taller interior as soon as they walk in. So they might come in through a small, narrow foyer, and then when they get into the lobby, it's a 2-story lobby filled with light. And if you're trying to show that you are technologically sophisticated, you're trying to show them that you are cutting edge, you're going to have digital displays, you'll have large glass windows looking out into a park-like setting, things of that nature. We do see that quite a bit whenever we go anywhere. At the same time, if you're trying to show someone like you're a financial institution, you're rock solid, they can trust you with your money, you might have more stone, you might have more solid material in your lobby on your building when you're walking in, because again, you're trying to reassure someone. Architecture really is a very big mnemonic device. We associate certain feelings and certain thoughts with buildings and how they look. We know when we go into a church that's somewhere unique and special because of how it's built on the exterior, how it's built on the interior. It's that same progression of kind of narrow to open, and then your view straight down a corridor to the altar, to where the preacher's standing at, and that is what your focus is. You know where your focus is at. So there's that. And then when it comes to the exterior of the buildings and how you group buildings around it, something that's fascinating is humans are both I can't remember the term now, but basically we're both agoraphobic. We don't like being in crowds, but at the same time we don't like being alone. We don't like being in an open area by ourselves, which a lot of the 70s and 80s downtown cities, you had these public plazas, public parks that were big open fields, essentially, of either brick or concrete or whatever. And because the thought at that time was, oh, you want to be able to see what's around you because you don't feel safe. Well, that actually led people to feeling less safe, because now there was nowhere for them to kind of back up to. So that we want, as humans, to be able to back up against something solid, but at the same time look around us. Think of it as our brains want to be at the edge of the forest looking out across a plain. We know we have to cross a plain, but we like being in the forest, but we don't like being deep in the forest either.
Right.
Because people are walking.
Because that at the same time, you don't get to see what's around you. So
yeah, that's a good point.
It gets very interesting to balance those when you're doing a public park or a plaza or spacing buildings around. So a lot of what the second half of the 20th century was doing from about 1970, 80 onward was really researching and looking at how the urban form looked from classical eras. Because we had moved so far away from that we thought, oh, they were doing that because they were stupid during the early 20th century. They were stupid. They didn't know what they were doing. Well, then we noticed that no, there was actually a rhyme to their reason, kind of thing.
Oh, for sure.
So after that, we started seeing more plazas and parks and more streets planned out with those older elements added back in, as opposed to what was dominant in the early 20th century to about 1980, which was put a big-ass street down here. You're done. Move cars as fast as you can. That is really what preoccupied the 50s, 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s for urban planning and urban design, was how can we get as many cars as we can to move through this area as fast as we can.
So you're
because everybody's.
Go ahead, Raymond.
I was just gonna say everybody's rocketing from their house to the factory and rocketing back, right? Mm-hmm. Getting whatever they can on the way. Yeah. It's interesting to think about all that and how things are being planned. The first time I ever really thought about the planning of an environment was when I walked through an IKEA, which IKEA there may have been illicit substances involved, but the thing is like this was one of those moments where I felt like I was walking through like an art installation, because it's like a story. Like you walk in And the first thing you're introduced to is you're showcased how all these rooms could be arranged, right? The possibilities of the future. And then the next step you walk through, all those elements are suddenly deconstructed into their like particulars, right? Like here's all of the kitchenware, here's all of the beds and kids stuff and blah blah blah. And then it ends as a tragedy because you come to the end at the warehouse where everything is boxed and you can't find your way and you have to, ask people about like how do I fucking get this, Kirk Hicks blanket or whatever the fuck,
Or where do I find the shelves that go along with this cabinet?
You forgot the most critical moment in IKEA.
The Swedish meatballs.
Before you get to the boxes. Exactly. Before you get to the boxes, they have a stop for food.
That's right.
But that was designed, right? Architecturally, that was designed for a reason, yes?
Not architecturally. That is actually a whole separate subgenre of interior design called retail psychology.
Now, I'm curious to know, as someone with a master's in architecture and then a master's in urban design, how much interior design studies did you have to go through? Because obviously, that does play a bit of a role. Just one class. That was it.
Just one. I opted to take. Actually, what Rainwater just described, it was a built environment psychology course. So what it did was it kind of trained my eye to figure out how to make people feel certain ways on the interior of a building, and retail psychology is a major use of that. IKEA is brilliant in it. You really never you never feel it as much as you do as when you're in an IKEA.
Yeah.
Because it really is. It is designed exactly the way you said. You see all these things, your eyes get big. Oh, I could update my bedroom and all this stuff. And then they have you stop at the cafeteria. You sit, you eat, you think about it more.
Right. That's your planning stage. Yeah.
And then when you go downstairs, it's a mad rush to just get whatever you can and then get out.
So then, while we're kind of touching upon the subject of interior design, I don't see there being a way for you being having a master's of architecture, urban design, a little bit of interior design stuff, having never heard of feng shui. Have you? You're aware of this this Eastern concept? No.
Aware? Yes. Understand it? No.
Have you looked into it at all? Like, are you just confused by it, or you're just not informed enough about it?
Go with the last two.
That's fair. Okay. Because just recently
not really informed and not really interested all at the same time. I know it was like a big thing in the 70s and 80s and 90s, feng shui, all that stuff. But it really just goes to psychology again, and different cultures have different aspects of what they consider appropriate for interior design. For example, Victorian era. If you ever find a Victorian era London image of an interior, they crammed everything they could into a room. And that was because what they wanted to do was someone walks in, they wanted to show that they had money, they had status, they had power, because look at all this stuff. And then in like the 50s, 60s, modernism came in, and instead of having all this stuff, instead we whittled it down to, okay, we just want a few things artistically displayed. And that's kind of where feng shui started to come in at for the Western world.
Because just recently I repainted my wonderful office that I'm in right now, and because I took all of the stuff out, obviously, when I painted. And then when I decided to come back in, I was like, well, I need to make this more work productive. So I Googled feng shui, and I arranged my office the way that it suggested. And to be honest with you, I have been more productive about it. I'm curious to know, do those things because in a way, if you think about it, the feng shui and interior design in a very micro kind of way are almost in the same vein of architecture. It's just like on a smaller scale because that psychology plays into it. Like, I know that there's the psychology.
Again, what it's doing is it's taking psychology and putting it in the built environment. So yeah, they're still one and the same. But, sometimes I wonder if you don't feel like you're more efficient because you read about it, as opposed to, like,
a placebo
you read
effect.
it, you'll be more efficient, and therefore you are more efficient.
That's a fair point. But then there's also something to be said about things like where they say, if you're in a bedroom, the bed needs to be facing towards the doorway, right? No one read about that, but it's just one of those things that you turn around and you notice, oh, my bed has always been facing the doorway, and that's like a DNA level type thing where you're just programmed to be ready to go in a fight, like a survival thing in the span of a second in the middle of the night. Do you get instincts like that? Does an architect get instincts like that when they're designing? Do they think about that when they're thinking about, okay, the door's going to go here. Do I put another door over here and then fuck with them so there's two doors and no one will ever use this as a bedroom? Or, like, how does that come into play?
Sometimes I do wonder that, especially when I go into some locations. I have to wonder if an architect considered the use of the interior. Because sometimes there will be a window and it's like that would be the perfect spot for me to put my desk so I could see out that window, but they arranged the rest of the room where it's absolutely impossible to do it. So there is a disconnect, especially when you get up to the corporate level of stuff where the architect will design the exterior and the main core of the interior, specifically the structural elements, like where are structural columns going, where's the fire escape going. And then they'll bring an interior designer in, and they will do other things to the building.
So then, well, but in the same vein, though, like it's, I don't know. Would you consider something like an open floor plan, which is something that you see more in residential houses these days, where people don't want that many walls? Even in offices and stuff like that. Is that more of an interior design thing, or is that an architecture move? And if it's an architecture move, who was the ballsy motherfucker that decided to go against walls? Like, that's chaos right there, right?
I can actually tell you the one who kind of inspired the trend. He didn't go against walls, but he started it, and then other people have kind of bastardized it. Frank Lloyd Wright is the one who really kind of got the ball rolling with open floor plan.
And how did
but his was not nearly as extreme as what we see now. His was he was a architect in Chicago, 1910s, 1920s was when he was getting his feet wet, and Victorian era buildings were still the items that were getting built. And again, Victorian era, you wanted lots of rooms, you wanted lots of stuff in all your rooms. Every room had its own thing because you wanted to show that you had this power behind you, this luxury, that you had a reading room, a breakfast room, a dining room, card room, all that stuff. What he did was he kind of pulled the wall out in between all that, where you would have a living room. That's it. And then the kitchen would be its own separate room, and then you'd have your bedrooms. So he combined a lot of those recreation rooms into one area. But then other people kind of kept that ball rolling, and then they started to pull out the wall in between the kitchen and the living room, and then they pulled out the wall between the kitchen, living room, dining room, and then you get new construction homes now that it's clear span from the time you walk in the front door to the back door. There's not a single wall on the first floor. I hate that.
Do you have any insight as to why he did that? Like, what was his motivation?
His motivation was to try and break down a lot of the Victorian era stuffiness and just get things to work together. He had some very lofty ideals, and I think he also just wanted to see if it could be done. Like, can I get this as a thing? He was a big egotist. He was really the first American star architect, where his name was his brand.
Interesting.
And it became a household brand.
Now, why do you hate how far people have built, or, well, I don't want to say built upon it, but taken it further? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, like you said, you hate that they've teared down the walls and stuff. And then on top, I'm asking a 2-part question. Why do you hate it? And 2, structurally, how the fuck do they pull that off where they have things built on top without things supporting it underneath?
Well, the second answer is going to be steel.
Okay. Fair enough. That's simple.
There will be steel, either trusses or steel girders brought in to support the second floor. That's a technical thing. There's always been ways around that.
Yeah.
It's what we're doing with our buildings, especially residential, are not that difficult to get open floor plans. But the reason I personally dislike it, and actually people working from home now has brought it kind of to the forefront, is there is very little privacy. There's very little noise absorption. So if someone is, frying up some bacon at the stove, you could be trying to have your kid on a school meeting in the front corner, and you're hearing both things at the same time. So that's really my big complaint. Then on top of that, there is, this is my own personal conspiracy theory. Let me put my little tinfoil hat on. All these new homes getting built with open floor plans and all that is directly related to the proliferation of self-storage units, which I don't know, Rainwater, you may see them springing up everywhere around you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, I don't know if you have them because you guys still have basements that get built for your new construction homes.
Yep.
Where Rainwater and I are at, we cannot have basements because, they'd be more like swimming pools.
Yep.
So what happens is there's no storage in the house. So people have all these things that they don't need out all the time. So they then have to build all these self-storage units. And so it's like this horrible cycle happening because no one wants to see self-storage units around here, but it's what gets built.
So you're so in your tinfoil hat conspiracy, you're saying that the self-storage unit industry is in cahoots with the modern.
I wouldn't say
floor
cahoots,
plans.
but they're certainly taking some free market advantage of.
They're capitalizing on it. Yeah, for sure. No, I can see that correlation.
That's not a bad business model, though. You can't really blame them for doing that.
Oh, I can't blame them. Doesn't mean I have to like it either.
Well, that's fair. So, okay, we're starting to come down towards the end of the show now, and I wanted to ask a really stupid question that you might not even have an answer to. But I'm just curious to know, while we're on the subject of tinfoil hat stuff, I want to know your 2 cents on who the fuck built the pyramids and how they did it. Because, who better to ask than you?
The self-storage unit people.
Yeah, exactly. The self-storage unit people invented time machine and went back in time and did it. So it was definitely built by the Egyptian populace to some degree. How they did it, we're continually finding out that people in the past had a lot better ideas for how to move things than we have now. We rely on mechanical vehicles to move all these things.
Yeah.
Well, they had to rely on ingenuity and natural uses. So, they have shown that you can have, you can lift large blocks using basically giant hamster wheels of people moving stuff around like that.
Wow.
You can run these blocks on sleds over cylinders of wood, so like palm, not fronds, trunks, palm trunks. Like there are things that it got built by people, and it's just something that the pyramids are a fantastic example of how long we've been building things because those are about 4,000 or 5,000 years old now.
Right.
Yeah, I have to say,
Cleopatra lived closer to our time than when the pyramids got built.
Yeah.
Rainwater, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say because apparently I'm a 65-year-old in a 35-year-old's body. I've been watching this BBC program called I think it's called The Cathedrals of Britain, And it's really fascinating because they go into detail about the history and the engineering prowess that went into building these cathedrals. And it's mind-blowing in terms of just like the kind of problems they're having to solve of like building these massive stone buildings, oftentimes on very unstable ground. So they're coming up with all kinds of different like solutions to like, deal with the problem. It's really, architecture and engineering is a really fascinating thing to me because it is like this merger of art and science in a way that is often not used, in the rest of the arts, at least not to the same intensity, right? Because like architecture, building, all that stuff is sort of like your vision is only as good as the prowess of like your math skills, basically, or like, you know what I mean? And that is going back to the pyramids, just an incredible kind of how do they do it sort of thing. Aliens.
And, well, like you talk about the cathedrals in England. Those got called Gothic style by people during the Renaissance when they were looking at things like the Pantheon and the Acropolis about how to build these pretty old things from Greek and Roman era. And they actually said, oh, that's Gothic. That was a bad term. That was the fall. That was the stupid people built that. We're building the stuff that the smart people before them built. Which I always loved that tidbit when I found that out because Gothic cathedrals, the flying buttress is what allowed those to do that.
Right.
But before Gothic cathedrals, you have the Roman-esque building, and the basic physics behind it is the higher up you go, the wider your base has to be, the wider your blocks have to be. So these tall basilicas that they were building before were dark, and they were narrow. The windows were very small because you didn't want openings because that meant the building could collapse on you. And arches. Arches did help a lot with that, but then they discovered the pointed arch could support a lot more weight with less material. They discovered the flying buttress could come in and keep the walls vertical with making the walls thinner and allowing windows to start breaking in. So there was a lot of work that went in over time for this. So it is fascinating that what was thought of as this horrible thing that happened because the Goths came in and destroyed Rome. It was like some of the most technologically sophisticated work that was done at the time.
Yeah, no, after watching that series, I'm like, I gotta go to Britain to go see these interiors to see what it's like, because it seems like an experience in itself just to be inside these buildings.
They are.
I wanted to ask you at least two more things. I don't know how much insight you can offer on this, but I feel like you could add some more than myself or Rainwater could. But before Trump was president, and a little bit before, or a little bit while Trump was president, but then way before the pandemic, the biggest national concern that I feel like everybody was talking about, especially political figures, was our crumbling infrastructure as America. And I'm curious to know, because I think you have a front row seat to that, right? Isn't that mostly some of the stuff that you have to handle in your job, or at least be studying and being keeping up with in terms of where we're at and what's going on and stuff like that? Is there any insight you can offer us to where the nation is on that? Because I feel like I haven't heard about it in so long, because there's been so many, like catastrophe things coming down on us that everybody kind of forgot about the fact that, our bottom is falling out.
Yeah. You actually raised a very good point. It was something that, way back when President Obama was elected the first time, I was fresh out of SCAD, starry-eyed about the world. And I was really excited because he wanted to do this massive infrastructure bill. So I was like, yes, that's dollar signs to companies that are going to want to hire architects, engineers, transportation, urban planners.
Once again, just looking out for yourself.
Of course. Hey, if it's good for the country and good for me, who am I to argue?
Good point.
So, I was really excited about that, and then it just seemed like nothing really came out of it. And then Trump did his own version. So there was the Tiger Grant, and then he changed it to the Build Grant. Yep. And that is what the infrastructure package was under. So those are both acronyms. I can't remember what either of them stands for word, but it's stuff that road projects, bridge projects could apply for and get federal money. So Charleston actually did apply for both of those 3 times. And on the 3rd time, we received money for a bicycle pedestrian bridge from West Ashley into downtown Charleston. And that is going to take probably about 3 years or so till it's constructed. So part of what happens is there is so much work and money that goes into these projects. Because it sounds simple of, we need a new bridge here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, not only do you need a new bridge, you need to figure out what do you do with the old bridge. You need to figure out how do we use the old bridge while we're building the new bridge. What happens with the alignment? What design specs are we doing this for? Are we making it larger? Are we making it the same? So there's just so much that goes into all that it's a really boring process. And I'm pretty sure anyone listening by now probably just fell asleep with me answering it. But it is one that it takes years upon years to accomplish.
Because safety, I'm assuming, is probably the number one thing. It's like, how do we not inconvenience people? Because obviously people still need to get where they're going, jobs or whatnot. But you also have to keep not just like the people alive, but also the construction workers have to be working safely and this and that.
And then on top of all that, there's the National Environmental Protection that comes in. So you have to make sure you're not impacting wetlands, you're not impacting birds, fish, all that you're not going to negatively impact them during or after construction.
Are those people just as annoying as they are when they're portrayed in Ghostbusters? I'm just curious. Are they just cool people? Or are they easygoing and being like, we got to work with you? Or are they dicks?
Because I generally side with them, I'm going to say no. But there is some gruffness to how some portray their requests.
Fair enough. So the last thing that I want to hit you with before we end, I'm curious to know your thoughts on skyscrapers. Is that like the holy grail for like an architect or an urban designer or whatever is that like the mountain, the biggest mountain to climb, the Everest for a job in that field?
So there are certainly architects that salivate over the idea of having a skyscraper.
Are those people with small penises? Is that what's going on?
I will not answer that question.
I'm just saying, it's like the guy with the big ass truck. It's like, okay, we know what's going on with you.
In terms of urban planning, it depends on the person you're talking to in the field. Some people say that we need to be building 3 to 4 stories and leave it at that, because we need to build up to that level and then you can go higher. Because at some point what you end up doing is essentially creating a vertical suburb where you come into the parking garage, you park your car, you got your favorite restaurant on the first floor of your building, you take the elevator up to your apartment, that's your day. Like, you're never leaving the building to go to the rest of the city. So for some urban planners, skyscrapers are not ideal. But there are always locations where it makes sense, and it is good use of land, such as large cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. You have transportation infrastructure, you have other things that are interconnecting skyscrapers to the rest of the city. But sometimes when, especially large residential towers are being built in some of the Sunbelt ones, they're basically turning them into vertical suburbs where the person's job might be in these suburbs. So they get in their car, they drive out there, they come home, and Saturday and Sunday they walk around the city, but that's about it.
Wow. I'm curious to know, how high can a skyscraper go? Like, is that like where, like, obviously there's the codes and ordinances and stuff that limit that, but I'm just curious from like a scientific level, how high can it go? Because the highest building was originally in Chicago, right? It was the Sears Tower, and then did that get dwarfed? I think there might have been a building in either New York or Hong Kong that beat it out.
Sears Tower, and then it went to the Trade Center, and then briefly back to Sears Tower, unfortunately. And then since then, Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries have surpassed.
Oh, that's right. India's got like a really giant one that Vin Diesel drove a car out of.
Yes, thank you for referencing. Currently, the Burj Khalifa, I believe, is the tallest structure. And let's see, I'm looking at this on Google, so I'm cheating here. It's about 161 stories tall and 2,722 feet.
Wow. And
I think that was the building that was featured in Mission Impossible 3, I want to say?
4 or 5, I think you're talking about, where he's climbing on the outside of it, right?
Yes. Yes, and then the sandstorm.
And these giant skyscrapers make fantastic backgrounds for films because they are sculptures. That's what they are. And then again, when it comes to urban planning, that doesn't do much for the ground level. Well, you might make for a really pretty picture in the background, but
I was going to say, you can always look up at it. It's not like your eyes are blinded.
Well, once you get to the level of the Burj Khalifa, you look up and you just see clouds. You don't even see the top.
That's true, but then on the same time, I'm sure that there's also got to be, there's like codes and stuff that limit what kind of like window material is used, what doesn't reflect sunlight, because I know that's a big problem here, at least on my commute home, when I had a commute, was that, there are, I don't want to call them skyscrapers, but really tall buildings, and for some reason the sunlight bounces off of them and it hits oncoming traffic, and that's what causes nighttime or evening traffic on my drive home, is that everybody's got to slow down because of the glare.
And there's not really, as far as I'm aware, there's not very many codes that come into play with that.
Well, there should be.
And I definitely do not disagree with that, because the same thing would happen during my commute. But it's you in terms of codes, when you start going taller, one of the fascinating things that you have to account for is the fact wind shear. The higher up you go. And to circle us way back to Star Wars, there's no way Padme could have had that much open balcony on that high of a building. She would have been flung off by the wind.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
But there are, and you can look this up on Google, and it's fascinating. Basically, what they've discovered is the higher up you go, you have to start putting massive pendulums inside the building to reduce sway.
Wow. That's crazy. So it counterbalances.
So we're basically building massive grandfather clocks that people live or work in.
That's awesome, though. I never knew that was happening. And that's all like internal, right? Mm-hmm. It's like hidden from the people inside.
Yeah.
Wow. That's nuts. So I know I keep saying this, but there's like one more thing that I wanted to ask was, and this I think is a good closing topic, but we've talked about, architecture and urban design in practicality. We've talked about it in film and how it's influenced real life. I'm curious to know, as a science fiction, fantasy, film fan, etc., is there any kind of architecture that you would like to see being inserted into fictional media again? Like it gets like it's overlooked by artists in other mediums that you feel like could be very contributive to whatever style or genre that they're telling. Is there any like genre or subspace of architecture that you feel like is just not noticed or by artists in other media?
I'd have to say that most styles that I appreciate and recognize are actually getting kind of their day in current film and television. So There's there's that Victorian era show that was very popular on Netflix recently. That kind of showcased a lot of that older London aristocracy style, and that's some of that to me is very beautiful. And then you had things like Black Panther showing this Afro-modernism, and that is kind of a vein that I'm very fascinated in, is Afro-modernism. It is, there was a time in the 50s and 60s when modern buildings through Africa were kind of making their own cultural identity. And they are very fascinating looking buildings. So I'm kind of glad that that's kind of getting pulled forward.
Yeah.
And then you have things like Gladiator that show ancient Rome in its glory. And, I really think most things are getting their fair day in the sun. Mad Men showcase mid-century modern.
And all of them do it pretty accurately, you would say. Obviously they probably take some creative liberties, but
there's always creative liberties.
That's fair.
Always. I don't know of anywhere in Africa that has flying public transportation right now. So,
not yet. You never know. Well, they are under like some kind of weird tech bubble that hides them. Or who knows? Elon. I would love. We're gonna wrap this up. We're not gonna ask you about this question, but I think we should definitely have you back on a future episode to comment on Elon's plans to cultivate life on Mars, because I feel like there's got to be a lot that could be interesting to talk about there. But also, the last time I recall, I don't know where it stands, but he was building like a subterranean rail system that was like a bullet train or something.
Don't talk to me about that.
Huh?
Don't talk to me about that.
All right, maybe. I don't know.
Have good things to say about it.
Well, then that's more interesting if you're heated and fired up. But anyway, this has been Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory. I have been Jow. I want to thank our guest, Eric Pohlman, for coming on and shooting the shit with us.
Hanging out.
Rainwater, always a pleasure.
Rainwater signing out.
And next week, we will be back to the duo of Rainwater and I for a couple of weeks while we just settle back down on some regular art topics. And then we'll be having guests again. I told you guys this was going to be interesting. And it's definitely interesting if you're still listening to this part of the podcast, because it means you haven't tuned out and you found it interesting. So I definitely want to implore you to check out some of the things that Eric was talking about, because I think a lot of, like when he was talking about the retail psychology, I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into the architecture that you could be researching when you're doing your art, whether it's comics or writing or film. A lot of that stuff can speak to the specific style about what your characters are going through, or the story points whatsoever. So it's definitely something to consider just as much as any other story point or aesthetic that you might be working on. Once again, Evil, thank you for coming on, brother. It's appreciated.
Yeah, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.